Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. They didn't know what they drilled into at first. Just quartzite, unremarkable, iron-laced, hardened by 2 billion years of heat and pressure. The kind of stone that breaks tools before it yields answers. But on the 16th core, 200 meters below the last recorded fault line, the rig jolted. Not jammed. Not resisted. Jolted like the earth flinched. The drill team froze. No alarms. No seismic warnings. Just silence so sudden it rang. When the core was lifted, its outer casing was scorched. Not burned, but etched like it had passed through something that remembered heat differently. Inside, compacted into the rock, was a single fossil. It didn't belong there. It had no place in the Precambrian. They logged it under standard procedure. Catalogued the coordinate. Logged the mineral content. No one said anything about what they all saw. The ridges across the fossil's back weren't weathered. They were smooth. Aligned. Linear. Like they'd been cut, not by sediment but by intention. They shipped it to the lab under routine transfer. No escort, no additional security. No one flagged it. Why would they? It looked like a trilobite until you looked too long. Then it didn't. The scanners were the first to choke. Spectrographs returned blank fields, not noise, just absence. Magnetic readings were unstable. The surrounding rock showed typical aging. Zircon inclusions, lead isotopes, nothing unusual, but the fossil itself defied calibration. It didn't register age. Not even contamination. 2 days passed before anyone touched it again. It was late. One of the technicians was cleaning up. She scanned the fossil's surface with a handheld barcode reader. Not protocol. Just instinct. She was joking. Smiling, even. Said it reminded her of packaging from a logistics plant she used to work in. Said the lines were too clean. The reader beeped. Loud. Sharp. A perfect signal return. She dropped it. Scrambled to pick it back up. Scanned again. Same tone. Same confirmation ping. The screen displayed a number. 14 digits. And a note. Code matched. U.S. Patent 90821B. She didn't laugh that time. No one did. They pulled up the archive. There it was. A biotech filing from 2031. Filed. Reviewed. Deleted. Patent sealed under corporate bankruptcy. The applicant listed as defunct. The filing marked for incineration under a compliance protocol not used since 2040. The fossil was dated at 1.9 billion years. Not a margin of error. Not a misreading. Confirmed by triple-pass uranium lead dating. Locked in position beneath untouched strata older than eukaryotic life. She stared at the fossil. She didn't ask how a barcode from the future got sealed into stone from the beginning of Earth's history. No one asked. Because even to ask was to suggest that time had stopped behaving the way we understood it. They reclassified the find. It wasn't a trilobite. It wasn't anything. Not yet. They gave it a number. Core sample 119C. The patent number pulled from the fossil's barcode wasn't hypothetical. It wasn't a near match, or a formatting error, or a freak coincidence generated by random striation. It was exact. 14 digits. Fully traceable. U.S. Patent 90821B. The system returned the filing date. March 14, 2031. The description line read, isotopic memory encoding via chitinous substrate. The inventor's name was redacted. The company name came up blank. When the request was routed through a higher-level clearance archive, the company reappeared for a moment, one blink of a server sync, and then vanished again. The deletion timestamp, August 2, 2037. Entire corporate shell dissolved within 24 hours. No bankruptcy hearing. No acquisition. No digital trace outside patent office mirrors. No survivors listed. The fossil had been pulled from bedrock dated 1.9 billion years old. That's older than fungi. Older than oxygen. Older than sex. Not a single person in the room spoke for an entire minute. One of them opened the patent abstract. The language wasn't academic. It wasn't even theoretical. The filing described a finished process, a working technique to embed microstructured data in bioengineered shells, using isotopically stabilized bands to preserve signal integrity over geological spans. The fossil didn't imitate that design. It was that design. Funding was quietly redirected. A new project ID was created. No emails. No formal memos. Just a redirect. An emergency meeting followed at an off-site location. Phones were left outside the room. Voice recorders were disabled. The conversation didn't begin with the discovery. It began with the leak. One of them had already made a copy of the scan. One of them had tried to decrypt the secondary code that sat beneath the barcode, barely visible, ultraviolet reactive. A smaller line of symbols, not language, not binary. A pattern with intervals too precise for biology, too consistent for damage. The internal consensus was never reached. Half believed it was a prank carried too far. The other half wasn't speaking. Not out loud. The funding didn't stop. Instead, it tripled. The site was locked down. The drilling rig was removed. All staff reclassified under Geological Survey Special Clearance. Core Sample 119C was moved without documentation to an unnamed facility with no prior connection to paleontology, geology, or deep core analysis. Public records showed a data storage warehouse lease. Climate-controlled. Secured. No visitors. None of the original field team were reassigned. They weren't dismissed either. They simply stopped being cited in ongoing research. Travel restrictions were imposed, unofficially. Family visits declined. Background checks intensified. Nothing was released. No papers submitted. No press conferences. No academic partners informed. Only one thing was made clear. The fossil was never to be referred to as a fossil again. It was to be treated as an object, an artifact, a manufactured item embedded in geologic time. Not a curiosity, not a hoax. An anomaly that matched human design principles over 2 billion years before there were humans. One researcher requested permission to contact the original patent holder. The request was denied. 3 days later, the applicant's profile on all known platforms was scrubbed. Academic references removed. Articles delisted. Thesis access restricted. They kept asking the same question. Who filed that patent? But the better question was never asked aloud. Who was supposed to find it? The reconstruction came from an old server backup, found buried inside an obsolete storage node at the edge of a defunct academic archive. No direct access. No password recovery. Someone had to emulate the operating system, spoof the hardware clock, and rebuild the environment line by line until the file rendered. It was clean. No metadata corruption. No signs of tampering. The document loaded in silence, screen backlit by the weak hum of recovery software barely holding together. Title in bold. Patent 90821B submission date verified. Full technical abstract intact. The language was clinical. No sales pitch. No vague projections. Just method. A process for embedding structured data at the molecular level using synthetic chitin scaffold. The chitin wasn't harvested. It was grown, engineered strand by strand, with stabilized isotope arrays locked into place by high-frequency annealing. The isotopes were not native to any known biostructure. They resisted decay not by shielding, but by exploiting interference patterns in subatomic alignments. A form of quantum pinning, deliberately staggered, layer after layer. The purpose line caught everyone's attention. Decay-resistant biological ledger. No context. No application scenario. No intended user group. Just that phrase. Ledger. Not record. Not signature. Not sample. Ledger. Something meant to persist, not for itself, but for what it held. They cross-referenced the fossil under enhanced resolution. The ridges across the fossil's casing had been assumed decorative, perhaps natural deposition or pressure-induced deformation. But the imaging showed something different. Each line mirrored the sequence described in the patent. Not generally, not vaguely, precisely. One segment of the fossil had a distortion, just under the anterior ridge. A fracture in the layering. When aligned with the reconstructed schematic, the fracture wasn't random. It was part of the encoding system, a checksum register. Someone had built this to last beyond comprehension. Not beyond decay. Beyond interpretation. As if the message itself didn't matter. Only its survival. A new question emerged. Why chitin? Not because it was organic. Not because it was common. Because it was programmable. Because it could be made to hold shape while appearing natural. Because it wouldn't raise alarms to the untrained eye. It could be misfiled. It could be mistaken. It could hide in plain sight until the right scan aligned, the right frequency struck, the right generation reached far enough down to touch it. No one could answer how a patent written in 2031 could perfectly describe a structure sealed into bedrock before any multicellular organism breathed. But someone noticed the footer of the original filing. A single line of code embedded at the end. Not a signature. Not a date. Just a string. 41-27-88-13-0. It didn't belong to any patent classification system. It wasn't binary. It wasn't geolocation. Someone suggested it might be versioning. Not of the document. Of the artifact. That meant there could be others. Not similar ones. Earlier ones. The search didn't begin officially. It couldn't. There was no framework for this kind of pattern, no authority that would sanction a global comparison of fossil barcodes dated to an era before animal life. The initiative started with whispers. Offhand remarks at geology conferences, mismatched specimen logs, cases where documentation didn't align with sample behavior. Not errors. Anomalies buried in silence, brushed aside because they asked for explanations no one had time to entertain. A university collection in South Australia reported a shelled imprint recovered in 1993. It had been labeled as unknown, pressed into a slab of folded phyllite from a gold prospecting site near the Gawler Craton. The archive photo had poor lighting, dust across the surface, but under contrast, the symmetry was unmistakable. Not natural banding. Encoding. A storage facility in southern Namibia flagged a record during inventory restructuring. The fossil had been packed away since 1982. No one had opened the crate in 4 decades. The shipping manifest described it as flattened marine detritus. No barcoding system had been available at the time. When scanned under current methods, it returned an incomplete signature. 12 digits, partial loss due to fracture, but still traceable. A core sample from Quebec, misfiled in a hydrogeology department since the late 1970s, showed abrasion patterns that aligned to the same modular structure. The sample had been used for teaching stratigraphy. Students had handled it, marked it, drilled into it. One edge had been sliced clean by a bandsaw during a demonstration on tectonic shearing. None of these discoveries were shared openly. Each came from personal initiative, archived out of reach, buried under decades of irrelevance until the pattern began to crystallize. Each sample pulled from Precambrian layers. Each showing non-random encoding. Not identical. Not duplicates. Variations. Recombinations. Each structured within the same architecture. A master format, expressed through modular permutations. The fossil found in the shield was not alone. It was part of a sequence. A distributed system etched into stone before anything breathed air. Not copies. Not replications. Instances. The codes didn't overlap. They complemented. When aligned spatially by latitude, the digit sets formed an interlocking series. Gaps between one code and another corresponded to base pair shift intervals in DNA sequencing models. Not directly biological, but analogously organized. As though whoever, or whatever, designed them had anticipated not just survival across time, but correlation across geography. One researcher noticed something else. The error rate. Each sample showed slight degradation. Not from environmental damage, but from age itself, atomic misalignment, isotopic bleeding, particle drift. Yet the degradation was accounted for. Encoded redundancies corrected it. Like each piece was designed to erode in a controlled way, the decay forming a measurable fingerprint over time. Not damage. Metadata. No one spoke about how many there might be. No one asked how far back the placement had begun. What unsettled them most was that none of the fossils had been discovered by directed search. Every one had been stumbled upon, mislabeled, misplaced, forgotten. Never revealed at the peak of attention. Always waiting. Always dormant until the wrong hands, or the right ones, disturbed the ground. They weren't fossils. They weren't evidence. They were waiting mechanisms, positioned before history. And someone, somewhere, had counted on them being found. He was listed as missing in 2035. Not publicly. Not through law enforcement. Internally, within the corporation that filed the patent. The termination notice wasn't signed. No next of kin recorded. No digital activity traceable after June of that year. His ID badge was last scanned at a security checkpoint in a restricted R&D lab. After that, nothing. No purchases. No communication. No bank transactions. A man erased not by force, but by absence. They found him by accident. A flagged algorithm used to cross-check biometric profiles against historical medical records returned a partial match in a remote patient intake form from a weather-beaten outpost in northern Iceland. The name was different. The signature slanted. The photo outdated. But the fingerprint scan held. He had been living in an abandoned observatory. Power drawn from wind. No network uplink. No satellite tether. No phone. The glass was boarded from the inside. He hadn't left in 3 years. The caretaker brought food. No questions were allowed. When approached, he didn't speak right away. He didn't ask who they were. He asked if they'd touched it. Not the patent. The fossil. The question broke the silence like a dropped match on dry ground. He said the barcode wasn't meant for identification. It wasn't inventory control. It wasn't logistics. It was structure. An encoding scheme not for machines, but for memory. A format built to hold resonance across stone. Not metaphorical resonance. Actual frequency. He spoke like someone reporting a dream. Not recalling it. Relaying it with the urgency of a message given, not created. He said it started after the lab incident. The power outage. The backflow through the isolation field. No injuries were reported. No materials lost. But in the weeks after, he stopped sleeping normally. Every time he closed his eyes, the same sequence returned. A sound too low to record. A pulse beneath it. Something pressing through his skull, not painful, but precise. He said it wasn't hearing. It was placement. As if his brain were a receiver, and the message was written through interference. He wrote down the sequence by hand. Over and over. Hundreds of pages. They matched no language. They matched no encryption. He ran them through structural simulations out of desperation, not method. The arrangement coalesced into patterns. Equidistant intervals mapped to quartz lattice harmonic. When pressure was applied at the right temperature, the vibration aligned into a feedback loop that didn't degrade. He didn't understand why it worked. Only that it held. Like the pattern wasn't meant to be read, only replayed. Like something far older than thought had figured out how to write permanence into erosion. When he filed the patent, he left the purpose line blank. The company filled it in. They wanted to use the format to store medical records in living tissue. A gimmick. A commercial stunt. He left the project before the trials began. Not in protest. In fear. Not of failure. Of success. He said the idea was never his. He didn't invent it. He remembered it. He leaned forward, hand shaking, eyes dry. He said something buried that far back in time doesn't wait by accident. That structure doesn't remain intact through a billion years unless it was meant to be found by the right minds, at the right time. He said the dream stopped after he left. Not because he solved it. Because he delivered it. He hadn't spoken aloud in months before that meeting. Afterward, he didn't speak again. They stripped the fossil down atom by atom, not by destruction but by inference. Layered scans. Particle diffraction. Quantum resonance mapping. No biological decay. No structural disarray. What they found wasn't fossilized. It was preserved by function, not chance. The isotope array inside the shell pulsed with alignment signatures across a scale no natural system should maintain. It adjusted itself, imperceptibly, but measurably, as if aware of the passage of time. One physicist brought in under silent contract sat with the model for 12 hours before speaking. He didn't suggest reconstruction. He didn't ask for precedent. He said what he saw shouldn't be described as an object. He called it a fold. Not folded in shape. Folded in time. A construct embedded so precisely into the historical record that it resisted the normal decay of chronology. A passive artifact. Not transmitting. Not traveling. Positioned. No mechanic. No propulsion. No device to move forward or back. Just design, planted so that the material itself held a temporal correction loop. It wasn't made to survive time. It was made to remain in it, unchanged by the shifting metrics of causality. The deeper the analysis went, the more it resisted metaphor. The structure adapted to background radiation drift. It absorbed neutrino interference. It locked in spatial positioning with a self-correcting isotope anchor. What they held wasn't an ancient mistake or an impossible visitor from the future. It was the result of calibration, not journey. It had never moved. It had always been there. He drew an analogy no one liked. He said if you pressed your thumb into wet concrete and the concrete never dried, the imprint would still be there after every city rose and fell around it. This fossil was that imprint. Except the concrete was time. And the thumb had no source. They tried to model it. They tried to simulate how such a construct could resist entropy on a quantum scale. Every model broke after the first second. Unless they inverted the temporal axis. Not in real space. In conceptual placement. The moment they stopped treating it as something introduced into the past, and started treating it as something always meant to emerge from it, the math stabilized. The shell's alignment with background radiation matched values predicted for current time periods, not the era it was found in. As if it had adjusted itself forward, from a fixed anchor, holding alignment until someone caught up to it. The artifact wasn't waiting. It was sinking. Not with a date. With a recognition event. It wasn't meant to be found early. It wasn't safe until the observers could understand that it was never about where it came from. It was about when it had to appear. The question of origin collapsed. Where it was built didn't matter. How it arrived didn't matter. All that mattered was placement. Anchored into a segment of time so remote, no interference could reach it. Locked into a rock that would outlast continent. Hidden beneath sediment that no human civilization could access until the correct tools existed. It was placed into the earth not to travel through time, but to hold a position until time folded across it. Until someone realized it was never lost. Only dormant. Waiting not for discovery. Waiting for understanding. They stopped using the word origin. It lost meaning. Every attempt to chart a beginning point collapsed into itself. The fossil had no manufacturing trace. No precursor component. No workshop. No hands. The patent was real, but it came from data reverse-engineered off the fossil. And the fossil, by every physical and theoretical measure, was built using the design from the patent. It was a closed circuit. No entry. No exit. Just a pattern that reproduced itself across time through recognition alone. They mapped the logic out like a forensic diagram. First contact with the artifact led to its decoding. The decoding led to a patent. The patent seeded research. That research shaped the methods required to identify the artifact, which led to its discovery. The loop didn't spiral outward. It held its form, clean, undisturbed, a stable recursion. No one invented the structure. No one designed it from first principles. Every piece of knowledge about its form came from interaction with its completed shape. The architecture wasn't emergent. It was imposed. They called it non-originating. Not because it had no cause, but because it had no dependency on one. It existed because it had been made. It had been made because it existed. The timeline didn't branch. It didn't converge. It stood still. The artifact's presence was a fixed point that shaped its own necessity backward through causality. The implications broke the room. They weren't dealing with a visitor from the future. They weren't looking at ancient technology misplaced by accident or sent through some distorted channel. They were confronting a logic loop so stable, it persisted without any historical anchoring. Every component in the patent was available at the time of filing. Every material could be synthesized. Every procedure reproducible. But the arrangement, its shape, its precision, its function, was only accessible through exposure to the artifact itself. There was no moment of genesis. No moment someone sat down and said, "Here is the idea." The idea was already there, embedded in stone, waiting to be seen, so it could become itself again through the hands that remembered it without knowing. They traced the variations across the recovered samples. Each barcode differed slightly, yet every one was consistent with a set of transformation rules, a modular code system that allowed change without breaking identity. It wasn't random variation. It was constrained, controlled, as if the artifact had to keep changing, just enough to prevent stasis, just enough to remain discoverable without repetition. It adapted its presentation without altering its function. The logic extended into the sequence of discovery. Each site was unearthed only after the tools existed to recognize it. Never before. Never too late. The pattern guided attention not by force but by fit. The world was only ever ready for the artifact exactly when it needed to be. Someone finally asked it aloud. If nothing came first, if every step fed the next in an eternal feedback circuit, what does that make the artifact? Not a message, not a gift, a reference to itself, across time, not pointing forward, not pointing back, only inward. The meeting was held off record. No live stream, no transcription. The location wasn't disclosed. Each attendee received physical coordinates, not digital. No entry badge. No signal devices permitted. 17 seats filled. 3 left unclaimed. The room was quiet for the first hour. No one argued over the data. The measurements held. The models replicated. The signatures aligned. Consensus had already formed. It was the implications that broke them. One voice introduced a word no one else had used aloud. Chronocontaminant. Not anomaly. Not artifact. Contaminant. The shift wasn't rhetorical. It signaled risk. Not of danger, but of interference. Something embedded in time, beyond control, that contaminated the sequence of discovery. Not physically, causally. Something that couldn't be quarantined because it had no boundary. They reviewed the locations. 5 continents, 9 recovered samples, dozens still unaccounted for. Each one designed to trigger its own resurrection. Not through activation, but observation. Attention was the threshold. They laid out containment protocols. Deep core drilling moratorium, effective immediately. Global suspension of subcrust mineral exploration above a defined isotopic threshold. Samples older than 1 billion years to be reclassified under deferred status. Private contractors blacklisted. Academic permissions revoked. All to buy time. The language used was careful. Public safety. Environmental preservation. Geological stabilization. All false. The concern was not collapse or contamination. The concern was exposure. The concern was recognition. They drew a line around the event and called it control. But one of them refused. He didn't walk out. He stayed until the end. Spoke only once. No accusation. No warning. Only a question. If we found this without looking, how long before someone finds the next by accident? The silence that followed wasn't disagreement. It was fear. That night, he disappeared. Not into hiding. Into the network. A fragment surfaced 48 hours later. A data packet embedded in an obsolete code repository. Not indexed. Not signed. A single image file paired with a decoded schematic of the original fossil. Side by side with the 2031 patent. Line by line. A perfect overlay. The leak was deliberate. The timing precise. The packet included no demand. No message. Just data placed where the right person would eventually see it. Not shared. Planted. Like the fossil. Authorities traced the upload chain but found nothing useful. Each access point routed through machines that had been decommissioned years earlier. The protocol had already begun to fail. The silence they built around the discovery was no longer secure. Someone had decided the artifact did not belong to control. Someone had decided the artifact belonged to the pattern. And the pattern had already moved on. The transport wasn't listed on any registry. The coordinates were shared on paper, passed hand to hand without spoken confirmation. No plane. No convoy. The fossil was lowered by cable into the earth, sealed in a composite container that could withstand temperature shifts, radiation, seismic compression, electromagnetic null zones. Not for protection. For preservation. Because no one knew what would happen if it changed. The facility was already built. No one could say when. No one could confirm who had commissioned it. 4 agencies signed the custodial agreement. None admitted to authoring it. The signatures were initials. No titles. No countries. Just access permissions. There were no windows. No wireless. No mechanical automation. Inside, the fossil was placed into a chamber lined with neutral mass shielding. Cameras operated on analog film. Readouts recorded to tape. All outputs air-gapped. No direct relay. No synthetic memory permitted. Every action performed by hand. Every measurement done twice. Once for the record. Once for the verification. The fossil remained unchanged. Every test repeated the same conclusion. The structure had not aged. The resonance pattern remained locked. The isotope register matched the original readout, down to the decimal. Even the scratches made during extraction hadn't shifted. The artifact wasn't preserving itself. It was holding position, as if the concept of time around it bent just enough to keep it still while the world rotated, cooled, rose, collapsed. There were no discoveries in that chamber. No revelations. Only confirmations. Until she walked away. The lead geologist. The one who had first noted the fracture. The one who ran the isotopic analysis by hand before the automation was brought in. The one who kept asking the same question every time the models broke. She had spent 23 months underground. No leave. No reassignment. No comment. She didn't resign. She withdrew. No explanation. No statement. Just absence. But she left a voice log. It wasn't official. It wasn't stored on any institutional channel. It was recorded to a single strip of analog tape and placed inside a core sample case. One of the early ones, marked with her initials, hidden in plain sight. The tape began with silence. A breath. A pause. She spoke without emphasis. No anger. No wonder. Just clarity. She said the barcode was never a message. It never meant to be read. It meant to be repeated. Not as a signal. As a method. A blueprint etched into geology. Not to tell us something, but to show us what always had to be rebuilt. She said the artifact wasn't giving us knowledge. It was reminding us. She paused again. There was static in the background. Not distortion. Just the kind of silence that waits. And she asked the last question. What if human technology is just the ghost of something written into Earth before we arrived? The recording ended. No one has found her since. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.